Hey guys, this is Mr. Elwell again. Welcome to Mr. Elwell's classroom. I'm Mr. Elwell and you should be a sixth grader. Another concept that we need to talk about. Proportions. A proportion is how we measure one thing in light of another thing. We're scaling things up and down. Remember, if I had a map of a road, that is the road scaled down to a smaller size. It still has the same dimensions. Everything should be the same distance apart, just in a smaller form. And if I were to scale something up, like something really small, like in your science book, like a cell or an atom or something like that, they blow up this big picture. Everything is the same proportions, right? But it's bigger so that we can see it. So that's why we use proportions. Let's say that we have 1 foot, and in our scale, 1 foot is equal to 6 inches. Or no, we'll say 1 inch. 1 foot is equal to 1 inch. Okay, we're going to write it like this. 1 foot is to 1 inch as, we'll say 10 feet is to blank. And we're going to change this. We're going to say 2 inches. 2 feet is to 2 inches as 10 feet is to what? So in proportions, you always want your units of measure, the same one, to be across from each other. Okay? So, and you want the one you're comparing to the other one to be up and down from it, or to be under it, right? So with proportions, all you're going to do is you're going to say, okay, so this times what equaled this? Well, we know that 1 times 10 equals 10, which should mean that 2 times 10 is going to give us what this number should be, which should be 20. So 1 foot is to 2 inches as 10 feet is to 20 inches. Okay? So it's pretty simple, except when you start dealing with fractions in your proportions. Then it can get a little bit harder. So let's say we had 5/8 of an inch is to 2 feet as 3 3/4 inch is to what? Okay, so 5 1/8 inch is to 2 feet as 3/4 of an inch is to what? So we'd have to say what times 5/8 equals 3 3/4. Well, that's kind of hard to do. That one's not as easy to just look at and know the answer to. So what we can do is we can set up an algebraic equation. So what we can do is we can cross multiply, right? Because if you remember, when you set up a proportion, this could also be written as 5/8 2 feet equals 3 3/4 x. And we know, or not equals, but if we wrote them like this, then do you remember the extremes and the means? Well, you should, because we've been over it, but I'll go over it again. The extremes are the ones on the outside of this equation. The means are the ones on the inside. The means multiplied together should equal the extremes multiplied together. And if you notice, when it's written like this, those are the numbers that are diagonal from each other. So 5/8 times x should equal 2 feet times 3 3/4 of an inch. Okay? But, so yeah. So let's do that. We're going to have, so you can write that as an algebraic equation. It would be 5/8 x equals 3 3/4 times 2. And we're going to solve for x, and this should give us the answer to our equation. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply these together, but you have to change that first. So we have 5/8 x equals 4 times 3 is 12, plus 3 is 15, plus 15 over 4 times 2 over 1. This becomes a 1, this becomes a 2. That's going to be 15 over 2. So 5/8 x should equal 15 over 2. Okay, so you see what we've done so far. So once we get to here, we're multiplying 5/8 times x. So if we divide both sides by 5/8, then that's going to get rid of 5/8 on this side. So we divide it by 5/8, which if you divide a fraction, you just multiply by the reciprocal. So we would multiply by 8/5 on both sides. And that's going to cancel these out. They become a 1. Over here, this becomes a 1, this becomes a 4, this becomes a 1, this becomes a 3. So that's going to give us 12 on this side. So x should be equal to 12. So then we go back to that proportion that we had to begin with, okay, which was 5/8 inches is to 2 feet, as 3 3/4 inch is to what? And so we know that x equals 12, so that should be 12 feet. And to check this answer, all you'd have to do is multiply this by this, and this by this, and they should be the same thing. 5/8 times 12, that's going to be a 2. That's going to be a 3 because they're both divisible by 4. That's going to give us 15 over 2. 12, 15 over 4 times 2. That's going to give us 1. That's going to give us 2. That equals 15 over 2. Alright, so we got 15 over 2 for this one and 15 over 2 for this one, so we know that we got it right. And that's a quick review on proportions. I know they can be a little bit difficult, but you just have to slow down for a minute and think about it. Just remember that the top one multiplied by a number is they're multiplied by the same number to equal that other side of the proportion, right? And if you have trouble finding out that number, remember the extremes multiplied together equal the means multiplied together. So you can set up an equation like that. I know it's a little bit of a hard concept, but I got faith. You guys got it. So I've been Mr. Elwell. You've been a 6th grader. And remember, wash your hands. See ya.